Jonathan Roumie was about to say 7 words that would change Gwyneth Paltrow's life forever, but neither of them saw it coming. She had just delivered what she believed was a devastating blow. A piercing question meant to corner a man she thought she could gently discredit, a man of quiet conviction, of unwavering faith, and grace under fire. The cameras were rolling. Over 12 million people were watching. Gwyneth was confident she had him right where she wanted, trapped. But what Jonathan said next didn't just silence her. It unsettled the room. It pierced the illusion. It shifted something deeper. What were the 7 words that stopped Gwyneth cold? What could this soft-spoken actor, known for portraying Jesus Christ, possibly say that would make 3 major networks quietly attempt to suppress the footage? This is the story of one of the most explosive and unexpected interviews in modern television. A moment where quiet conviction met a billion-dollar wellness empire and didn't blink. It all began the day Gwyneth Paltrow made a mistake. She challenged the wrong man on the wrong day. 3 weeks earlier, Jonathan Roumie sat alone in a small corner of his Los Angeles apartment. Not a mansion, not a studio, a real home. Quiet, sunlit, simple. Morning light spilled across the pages of his weathered Bible as he prayed. He did this every day. No cameras, no audience, no followers, just time with God. Then the phone rang. It was the lead producer for Gwyneth's new special. They were inviting Jonathan to participate in a high-profile global event, the Ascension Series, a journey into modern spiritual enlightenment. It would feature gurus, best-selling authors, and celebrity coaches. Jonathan had heard whispers about the project. Gwyneth's empire had taken spirituality into new terrain. Masterclasses, crystal therapy, sound bathing, and $2,000 miracle alignment courses. Ancient wisdom repackaged for the elite. It disturbed him, not because he was threatened, but because the poor, the weary, the searching were being offered hope at a price. He almost declined, but something stirred, a nudge in his spirit, a still, small voice. This wasn't just an interview, it was an assignment. He looked around his space. No awards on the walls, just a small wooden crucifix his grandmother had given him, a framed photo of his parents, and shelves filled with books on scripture, prayer, and surrender. On the desk, handwritten letters from young people who had watched The Chosen. Letters that said things like, "You helped me believe again. You showed me what love looks like." Jonathan didn't chase fame. He had turned down roles, endorsements, and faith-based merch deals. He wasn't interested in selling his image. He was interested in living the message. But this invitation felt different, so he said yes. In the days leading up to the taping, Jonathan didn't prepare with PR consultants or brand reps. He fasted, he prayed, he meditated on truth, not as a strategy, but as a shield. He reviewed Gwyneth's recent teachings, phrases like manifest abundance and unlock your sacred self. He saw how suffering was being bypassed in favor of glowing mantras and vision boards. He thought of those struggling to feed their children, being told they just needed to vibrate higher. He grieved, and he knew he was walking into a fire. But sometimes obedience means walking straight into it. The night before the show, Jonathan knelt alone on his floor. He prayed not for eloquence, but for courage. He remembered Jesus turning over tables. He thought of wolves in sheep's clothing. He whispered, "If I stay silent, I join the lie." When Jonathan arrived at the studio the next morning, the opulence was suffocating. Marble floors, crystal light fixtures, framed photos of Gwyneth with prime ministers, influencers, billionaires. In the green room sat authors, spiritual influencers, social media prophets. Every one of them was selling something: a course, a book, a tour. Jonathan sat quietly in the corner, flipping through the Gospel of Luke. While around him, people compared speaking fees that could fund a homeless shelter for a month. Then came the clipboard. A young assistant approached with a scripted outline. "Please make sure to mention any products you're promoting. Your book, courses, merch lines. Our audience loves that." Jonathan smiled, gentle, calm. "I'm not here to sell anything," he said kindly. The assistant had blinked. It was as if no one had ever said those words before. Jonathan wasn't here for applause. He wasn't here for the game. He was here for something else entirely. "Our viewers love that kind of stuff," the assistant chirped as she handed Jonathan the clipboard. Jonathan smiled, gentle but steady. "I'm not here to sell anything," he said simply. The assistant froze. It was like no one had ever said that before. No book pitch, no retreat link, no branded candles. He wasn't playing the game. He had come for something else entirely. As the other guests took the stage before him, Jonathan watched from the wings. Gwyneth Paltrow sat center stage, interviewing a long procession of spiritual entrepreneurs, each offering a different formula for instant peace, guaranteed transformation, or cosmic alignment. It all had the same rhythm, a breathy story, a rehearsed revelation, then a product, priced and packaged. Every segment ended the same way: a product, a program, a price. The crowd responded with enthusiasm, eager to believe, eager to purchase. But Jonathan saw it with painful clarity. They weren't being offered transformation. They were being sold transaction. And that transaction came disguised as transcendence. He felt the weight of what was coming. He knew what he carried, a message of grace that couldn't be bought, a truth that didn't conform to slogans, soft language, or the shallow comforts of marketable spirituality. This wasn't going to be smooth. When his name was called, Jonathan stepped onto the stage. No entourage, no stack of books, no merch table, just his father's worn coat, a weathered Bible in hand, and a truth burning in his chest. Gwyneth greeted him with a warm, well-practiced smile. Her charm was flawless, her voice calibrated, her eyes calculating. Jonathan noticed it right away, the subtle sizing up. The game had begun. The audience applauded, politely, but it was different this time. There was tension in the air, like they sensed this man isn't here to perform. Jonathan sat down and bowed his head silently for a moment. "Lord," he whispered inwardly, "give me words that pierce gently but deeply. Help me serve, not impress." Gwyneth leaned in, beginning the segment with her signature elegance. "Jonathan, millions have been moved by your portrayal of Jesus. Both on screen and off, people look to you as a spiritual voice. Could you share what spiritual practices or consciousness work brought you to this level of awareness?" Jonathan paused. He heard it clearly. Practices, awareness, consciousness. He understood exactly what this was. It wasn't a question, it was an invitation to play along, but he hadn't come to play. "Gwyneth, he said, calm and kind, "I appreciate the question, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here because of spiritual techniques. I'm not chasing higher awareness. I follow Jesus Christ. He's not an idea. He's not a metaphor. He is the way, the truth, and the life." The room shifted. You could feel it. The audience adjusted in their seats. Gwyneth's practiced smile twitched slightly, tightening at the corners. Jonathan continued unfazed. "Everything I am flows from a relationship with a living God, not from mastering a mindset or manifesting a new energy." Gwyneth pivoted, graceful and smooth, like a ballroom dancer avoiding a fall. "That's beautiful, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft. "And of course, there are many paths to the divine, different names, different frequencies, but all leading to the same universal love, right?" She delivered it like a peace offering, warm and inclusive. But Jonathan knew what was happening. She wasn't just softening the message, she was flattening it. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. He leaned forward slightly, still gentle, still resolute. "Actually, Gwyneth," he said, "I have to lovingly disagree. Jesus didn't say he was a way. He said, 'I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.' That's not about exclusion, that's about truth. I'm not standing on preference. I'm standing on what he said." The studio fell into absolute silence. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Gwyneth's expression changed, still composed, but her warmth faded like sunlight behind a storm cloud. Her entire brand was built on the idea that every path leads somewhere sacred. And Jonathan had just drawn a line that disrupted the narrative. She leaned forward, voice still steady, but now sharper. "Jonathan, surely you are not suggesting that billions of spiritual people around the world are wrong. Isn't that the danger of religion? All this exclusivity?" It was a trap designed to paint him as arrogant, outdated, rigid. But Jonathan had walked through fire before, and he knew the difference between speaking truth and being cruel. He looked at her, not with defiance, but with clarity. "Gwyneth," he said softly, "I would never call anyone bad because of what they believe. But truth doesn't bend to good intentions. Sincerity doesn't equal accuracy. We can be kind, we can be compassionate, but that doesn't change what's real." The air in the studio grew electric. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a collision of conviction, compassion, and clarity. And Jonathan wasn't finished. He looked out at the audience. "Truth," he said quietly, "isn't defined by how we feel about it. It's defined by what is." He paused, letting the weight settle. Then he spoke again, this time slowly, deliberately. If my house is on fire, and I sincerely believe water won't help, my sincerity won't save me. The truth is, it takes water to put out a fire. The analogy struck with surgical precision. Simple, irrefutable. The audience, once shifting with discomfort, now began to nod, some gently, some stunned. Even in a studio built for applause, you could hear the silence. Not empty silence, holy silence. Gwyneth's expression shifted again. A tiny crack formed beneath her curated calm, frustration. She wasn't used to this, being challenged, especially not on her stage. Then came the pivot. "But Jonathan," she said, her tone suddenly laced with a soft condescension, "don't you think it's a bit arrogant to claim that your faith is the only truth? What about all the ancient traditions, the sacred knowledge that's guided humanity for centuries?" She delivered it like a spiritual school teacher, gently correcting a misinformed child. The audience murmured, some in agreement, some just intrigued. But Jonathan didn't blink. He had seen this moment coming. He leaned in slightly. His voice was low, clear, and unwavering. "Gwyneth," Beach said, "I'm not here to defend religion. I'm here to point to Jesus Christ. There's a difference. Religion can become a product, performance, something we package and sell to make people feel better without ever actually changing their hearts." That line hit like thunder. The studio seemed to collectively hold its breath. And Gwyneth, she blinked, then narrowed her eyes. She knew instantly he wasn't just speaking in general. He was speaking about her. Jonathan continued, now with quiet intensity. "The Jesus I follow didn't come to build empires. He didn't launch luxury retreats or master classes. He came to seek the lost, to forgive the sinner, to heal the broken, and he did it all for free. No subscriptions, no sacred merchandise, no VIP access." The words didn't just float, they cut. And not with cruelty, but with truth. You could see it happening now. The control was slipping from Gwyneth's posture. Her smile faltered, her shoulders stiffened, her gaze hardened. This wasn't disagreement anymore. This was confrontation with conviction. Then she leaned forward, voice low, velvet smooth, but now sharpened beneath the surface. Predator mode, engaged. "Let's be honest, Jonathan," she said, her voice cool. "You've made millions playing powerful spiritual men. Isn't it a little hypocritical to criticize others for profiting off faith when that's quite literally how you made your name?" The audience perked up. It was blood in the water territory now. But what Gwyneth didn't realize, what she hadn't prepared for, was that this wasn't a weak spot for Jonathan. It was his strength. Jonathan reached calmly into the inner pocket of his weathered coat. He unfolded a creased sheet of paper, held it up. "Gwyneth," he said gently, still composed, "you're absolutely right to ask that. That's why I came prepared." He turned the paper toward the camera. "This is my personal bank statement from last month. Balance, $1,800. A gasp rippled through the audience. Even the camera crew stirred. Jonathan didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. "I give away everything I don't need to survive," he said plainly. "I live in the same apartment I had before The Chosen. I drive a car older than some of the people in this room. And most nights, I eat rice and beans at my kitchen table." Gwyneth sat still, frozen. This wasn't in her script. Jonathan looked directly at the audience. "You see, when Jesus sent out his disciples," he said, "he told them to carry nothing. No gold, no backup plan. Deny yourself, pick up your cross, follow me. It's not about being poor, it's about where your treasure is." The weight of his words didn't stir emotion, it stirred conscience. The audience began to shift. They were seeing it clearly now. Two very different kingdoms on that stage, and for the first time, many began to ask themselves, which one do I belong to? Gwyneth's composure cracked. Her voice rose, tight, raw, stripped of polish. "That's easy for you to say," she snapped. "You're the one getting all the attention, the awards, the standing ovations." Her tone turned sharp, wounded. "Don't come on my show and pretend you're humble when your whole career is built on playing God." Gasps swept through the studio. Gwyneth Paltrow, the queen of serene self-assurance, had just lost control. Live, on air, in front of millions. But Jonathan? He remained exactly as he had come, grounded, still, steady. He let the silence breathe, then said softly, "Gwyneth, I'm not pretending to be God. I'm portraying a man who claimed to be God and gave his life for it." He paused, allowing the truth to settle. "And as for the attention you mentioned, most of it comes from the people who are desperate for hope, for meaning, For someone to tell them they are loved unconditionally. His gaze swept the audience and then locked eyes with Gwyneth. The same people who come to your retreats, who buy your supplements, who are hungry, searching. That line hit hard. You could almost hear the moment her facade cracked. Jonathan could see it in her eyes, the recognition that she had built an empire, not on helping people heal, but on their ache. And now the ache was staring back at her. But somewhere along the way, Gwyneth had stopped feeding them truth. She'd replaced it with polish, packaging, and premium content. And now, the tension in the room was thick. Gwyneth Paltrow, used to controlling every narrative, every energy, knew in her bones this wasn't her stage anymore. She tried to grab it back. Her voice turned sharper now. Cool, precise. The velvet had turned to stone. You know what I think, Jonathan? She said, the smile gone. I think you're just another religious fanatic using people's faith to make yourself feel important. I think you're dangerous. The words landed like a slap, not from conviction, but from fear, a lashing out from a cornered empire. But Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. Instead, he stood up slowly, deliberately, and the entire studio held its breath. He looked at her, his voice low but steady. Gwyneth, he said softly, 3 days ago, I got a call from a little boy in Detroit. His name is Michael. He's 7 years old, and he's dying of leukemia. A ripple of stillness moved through the room. Jonathan's eyes glistened, but he remained composed. His mom told me he watches The Chosen every day from his hospital bed, that it's the only thing that gives him peace. She asked if I'd speak with him, even just for a few minutes. Now the room was silent. Every eye locked on Jonathan. Even Gwyneth sat frozen. Michael asked me if Jesus really loves little boys who are sick, if heaven is real, if his mom and dad would be okay when he's gone. Jonathan's voice cracked ever so slightly. I told him yes, that Jesus loves him more than he can possibly imagine, that heaven is more beautiful than anything he's ever dreamed, and that his parents would see him again someday. Tears were already falling in the audience. Even members of the camera crew wiped their eyes quietly. Then Jonathan turned and looked directly at Gwyneth. But then, he said softly, Michael asked me something that broke my heart. He said, does that lady on TV who talks about God, does she really know Jesus? Because she looks kind of sad when she smiles. The words struck like a hammer. For the first time in the entire interview, Gwyneth Paltrow was speechless. The armor cracked. The performance dropped. She was unmasked in front of everyone. You could hear the crying now. Not polite sniffles, convicted weeping. Jonathan continued, his voice tender. I told Michael, only God knows the heart. But I said this too. Pray for everyone who talks about God on TV, because that's a heavy responsibility. That single sentence, spoken on behalf of a dying child, did what no sermon could. It exposed the difference between real faith and performance. Gwyneth's hands trembled. She tried to respond. That's emotional manipulation, she said, almost in a whisper. But no one believed her. She looked out at her audience, desperate for reassurance. But this time there were no smiles, only sadness, disappointment, and yes, pity. They weren't just watching a show anymore. They were seeing the truth, and they were seeing her. Jonathan shook his head slowly, not in judgment, but with deep, aching sorrow. No, Gwyneth, he said gently, that's not manipulation. That's a little boy who knows the difference between someone who loves Jesus and someone who uses him. Children see what adults try to ignore. Their hearts aren't clouded by pride or platform. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights. Then Jonathan reached into his other coat pocket and pulled out his phone. Gwyneth, he said softly, Michael is watching this broadcast. His mom texted me this morning. He was excited to see Jesus on TV with the pretty lady who helps people. He held up the phone so she could see the message. Would you like me to call him now? You can tell him yourself that his hope isn't misplaced, that Jesus is just one of many options, that faith is just a market product. The challenge didn't shout, but it thundered, and Gwyneth went pale. For the first time in her public life, she had nothing to say. Here stood a child, facing death, with nothing but faith and hope. And Gwyneth had spent the last 30 minutes trying to dismantle the very foundation of that hope. The audience watched her now, not with admiration, but with disbelief, with expectation, and a touch of fear. They were starting to realize she was being asked to do something unthinkable, look into the soul of a dying child and tell him he was wrong to believe. I can't, Gwyneth whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it said everything. The admission was, Devastating. The woman who had built $1 billion empire on healing people couldn't bring herself to destroy one little boy's faith, even though for years she had commodified that same faith for adults, repackaged it, branded it, sold it back to them. But now, confronted with the real thing, she broke. Jonathan's voice softened, not triumphant, not smug, just compassionate, a man holding pain, truth, and grace in the same breath. "Gwyneth," he said, "I don't believe you ever wanted to hurt Michael, or anyone. I believe deep down you really did want to help." He paused. His eyes carried something ancient, the same gaze Jesus might have given the rich young ruler, love and sorrow. But somewhere along the way, you started believing you could improve what Jesus offered, that you could make it softer, easier, marketable. And in doing that, you ended up with something less. His voice sharpened now, not in anger, but with the urgency of truth. When we try to make the gospel more comfortable, we make it less powerful. When you try to make it for everyone, Jonathan said quietly, you risk making it for no one. Jesus didn't come to make us feel better about our past. He came to transform our future. He didn't come to validate our choices. He came to change our hearts. And he didn't come to make us rich. He came to make us righteous. Each line struck like a chisel against marble, carving through decades of illusion. Gwyneth sat frozen, no longer angry, just shaken. The audience was still. Some were weeping, others simply stunned, but every single one of them was listening. Many of them had paid thousands for enlightenment, empowerment, energy balancing. Now they were realizing what they had been searching for was always free. Jonathan looked at them with a tenderness that almost hurt. "You don't have to buy truth," he said softly. "You don't have to earn love. You don't have to achieve enlightenment. Jesus offers all of it freely to anyone who will come to him with nothing in their hands but an open heart." And then it happened. Gwyneth found her voice, but it was small, fragile, honest. "What about all the people I've helped?" she whispered. "What about the lives I've changed through my work?" It wasn't defensive, it wasn't postured, it was a cry. The cry of a woman who had built her identity on her impact, now realizing that maybe it hadn't led where she thought. Jonathan's face softened, even more than before. "Gwyneth," he said gently, "I believe you have helped people. Kindness is always good. Encouragement is valuable. But there's a difference between helping people feel better and helping them find what's eternally true. It's not enough to inspire people to believe in themselves if we never point them to the God who created them." Then he asked the one question no one had dared to ask. The real question isn't, "Have you done good?" It's, "Have you pointed people to the one who is good? Have you led them to the source of hope or become a substitute for it?" The words hit like a final chord, clear, resounding, true. And that's when it happened. Gwyneth Paltrow, queen of lifestyle branding, architect of spiritual consumerism, billionaire voice of modern enlightenment, crumbled. Her face dropped, her shoulders slumped, and in a whisper, "What if you're right? What if I've been wrong about everything?" The vulnerability shook the room. No spotlight, no empire, no curated image could protect her now. She was no longer a mogul. She was a human being, asking the only question that really matters. The audience held its collective breath. This was no longer a talk show. This was sacred ground. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice tender, filled with holy weight. "The same grace that saved a broken man from New York," he said, "can save a media mogul from Los Angeles. The same Jesus who forgave the woman at the well can forgive anyone who comes to him honestly." He knelt beside him, not towering above, but eye to eye. "The beautiful thing about Jesus," he said quietly, "is that he doesn't wait for us to have it all figured out. He meets us in the middle of our mess and turns it into something beautiful." The offer of grace hung in the air like a lifeline thrown across decades of power, performance, and pride. And in that moment, the world held its breath, because something was about to happen that would echo across the internet, be replayed for years, and be remembered forever. Jonathan Roumie, a man known for his humility, depth, and integrity, stood still until she moved. And Gwyneth Paltrow, the queen of curated wellness, stood from her chair and walked slowly across the stage. No words, just tears. And then, in an act that shattered every image she'd spent years crafting, she knelt beside him. And in that kneeling, decades of pride, self-reliance, and empire building collapsed. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to stop being in control." That single sentence brought the studio to absolute silence. Because in one breath, she admitted what no one ever thought she'd say. She wasn't enough. Jonathan knelt with her. No spotlight, no branding, just presence. That's exactly where Jesus meets us, he whispered. At the end of ourselves, when we've run out of image and power has no answers. He looked to the audience. Many were openly sobbing. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He wasn't talking about influencers. He was talking about people who know they've got nothing but the need for grace. He turned to Gwyneth again. "Would you like me to pray with you?" She nodded, barely able to speak through the sobs. Jonathan bowed his head, and the prayer began. "Jesus, here's your daughter, Gwyneth. She's tired of holding it all together, tired of performing strength. She doesn't want the image anymore. She wants you." And in that moment, the performance ended. No applause, no outro music, just stillness and real worship. No more network polish, no brand, no ego. Real worship began. Gwyneth wept, not the polished tears made for press kits and camera angles, but the gut-deep, soul-breaking kind that says, "I've missed it, and I'm done pretending." She wept for the years she had sold hope she barely understood. She wept for the walls she had built, instead of the bridge she had finally found. The audience watched in stunned silence, mouths open, hearts open. Some whispered prayers, some fell to their knees. And when the prayer ended, Gwyneth stayed there, silent, still. Finally, she looked up at Jonathan. Her eyes were clearer than they had been in decades. "What happens now?" she asked. Her voice was small, but her heart was wide open. Jonathan smiled the way only a man at peace can smile. "Now, he said, you stop trying to improve Jesus. You walk with him, not in front of him, not behind, with him. Because being his is better than trying to be your own God." The fire in her eyes had changed. It wasn't ambition anymore. It was something gentler, cleaner, real. There was no outro music, no thank you for watching, just silence, holy silence. When Gwyneth finally stood, her body trembled. She looked out at the people, not as followers, but as fellow travelers. "I don't know what this means for my show or my business," she said honestly, "but I know this. I can't go back to pretending I have all the answers when I've just realized I've been asking all the wrong questions." The crowd didn't cheer. They honored her. Soft applause, not performance applause, but the tear-stained kind that comes from witnessing something holy. In the weeks that followed, Gwyneth shocked the world. She dismantled her multi-million-dollar spirituality brand. She canceled miracle courses, cut ties with New Age influencers, and shut down empowerment summits. Then, in a quiet, unadvertised video, she looked into the camera and said, "I've spent years selling people what they wanted to hear, instead of what they needed. I pointed them to themselves when I should have pointed them to their Savior. The financial loss was enormous, but the spiritual gain, eternal." 6 months later, a small Detroit newspaper ran a story. Most media outlets ignored it. Gwyneth Paltrow had been quietly visiting children's hospitals. No press, no cameras, just her, a book, a Bible, and a prayer. And one of those children, Michael, still alive, still fighting, still smiling. And to every nurse, volunteer, or visitor who came through his door, he said with innocent joy, "Miss Gwyneth found Jesus too, just like me." The ripple effect of that moment never stopped. Not because it was viral, but because it was true. Millions watched the clip online, not for drama, not for entertainment, but because for the first time they saw something they couldn't find anywhere else. Humility, repentance, grace, the real kind, the kind that saves. One woman commented, "I saw the most successful person I knew admit she needed a savior. If Gwyneth Paltrow can kneel before Jesus, maybe I can too." Jonathan returned to his quiet life, his roles, his craft, but his legacy wasn't in lines memorized anymore. It was in truth lived. And Gwyneth, she no longer saw herself as a guru or a brand, just someone saved by grace. She told a journalist, "I thought I was successful when I had everything I wanted. I discovered I was truly successful when I wanted what God wanted." So now the question is yours. What if, like Gwyneth, you've been asking the wrong questions? Then maybe, just maybe, it's time to take the first step toward the one who's been waiting for you all along. Arms open, grace ready, love unlimited. If you believe some truths are worth standing for, no matter the odds, share this story with someone who needs hope. And in the comments below, tell us,